Hi, it's Louisa Dahl. And welcome to the Interactive Minds podcast, where I talk with passionate marketers, innovators, and digital leaders about their specific recipes for success. In today's show, I interview Michael Weeding, talking about how marketers can create a sustainable performance culture. It was a really interesting discussion where Michael shared some insights into a framework he's developed across his extensive digital transformation experience. Here's 3 things you're going to learn. 1, the 3 performance factors in building digital capabilities. 2, the most common gaps in capability that Michael sees. And 3, the conversations you need to be having around the role of digital in the organisation. Now, before we start, I want to mention that we're currently in the time of home isolation, which means I'm recording this podcast with my whole family at home. At times during this interview, it sounded to me like there was a full-blown children's party in the background. I can assure you this was not the case, and I hope you can excuse any background noise that creeps in. Let's get into it. Today on the show, we have Michael Weeding, a veteran marketer who has some amazing experience, including over 16 years in banking. Michael was most recently the Director of Digital Innovation and Transformation at AMP, and now is a consultant helping organisations with customer and digital transformation. Michael and I first met back in 2013 when I asked him to speak at our very first Digital Summit event. Welcome to the show, Michael. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here, and thanks for having me.
No problem. Now, tell us a little bit about you. I've given us a bit of a summary to our listeners. Summarise your career for us and I suppose the different steps that you might have taken over that period.
I suppose the question is, how far can I go back? I'd like to call myself someone who's a bit of a veteran in the whole, we now call it the digital age, but I would like to say that we used to call it the internet days back in the mid-90s. It all started back for me where in the mid-90s I started my own business, and the business was focused around helping businesses. At the time, everyone was rushing towards websites and just helping businesses themselves actually pick up on how do they better tap into this change that was happening. My background, I obviously had a passion for, computer science, but it didn't really fit my personality, and I sort of migrated more to business. So when the internet started to emerge, I really jumped into that.
Yep.
So I spent quite a lot of time back in the 90s developing different products that helped organisations understand how they could leverage the internet more effectively. Jump forward a little bit, I then ended up at Citibank. Came in at a time when they were just starting to look at how this internet was going to impact their ability to obviously acquire and service customers. So it was still pretty much in the early days of internet and digital. And Citi as an organisation themselves, we're really trying to push forward. One of the most interesting parts of the whole journey with Citibank is they got onto the data science long before any other organisations. They had a chairman, a guy called Walter Ristrom, back in the 80s or 70s, who actually said data is going to be more important for banking than money. And so they had quite sophisticated marketing capabilities. They knew how to send an envelope to someone in the mail and acquire high-quality leads. So I came in there with the view that how do you sort of bring digital along that journey? What I discovered was where I thought it was probably going to be as simple as sort of building the websites and setting up all the capabilities. It actually turned out to a lot more difficult because they had quite sophisticated decision management or intelligence through their data science team. So I leveraged that and managed to use that. Then took over the whole digital side in building out all their digital banking and other apps. From there, I ended up at AMP at the start of their transformation. AMP was an organisation that was now grappling with the change in 2013, 2014 that was going to happen to their business as customer became more of a focus. And how do they then start to transform around digital? So I led that, for 6 years, and that sort of merged into more of their customer experience transformation as that evolved.
Yep. And now you're in consulting. How was that transition for you?
Yeah, well, I'm still sort of working through that, to be honest. I'd like to say, I came out of the 90s, right? And I sort of had, interesting experiences into the whole dot-com crash. And I'll be honest with you, I came out of that with the view that I wanted to, not so much be relying on myself and other businesses. So coming back into it now, look, the opportunity for me was I wanted to broaden my skill set. I sort of think, after 16 years in banking and in digital, I've got quite a depth of experience when it comes to the internet sort of digital space. And for me, I wanted to think, how do I leverage that more across many other industries and sort of challenge myself. So I would say I'm in the middle of disrupting myself. I don't know where that will end up, but taking forward a bit more of a focus on some consulting contracting work was a way for me to now start to test my capabilities more broadly.
Yeah.
Over the many years, over the many years of the work that I did, I'd sort of developed myself quite a sophisticated framework that I used that helped me make the decisions and do the roles that I was doing. And I also wanted to test, does it have more depth that it can actually help other organisations as they sort of try and tackle digital more wholesomely?
Awesome. And I'm looking forward to hearing about this framework. I know when we were talking, you described it to me as how can you be a better leader, and looking at how you can add some structure and framework around that in building a sustainable performance culture. So tell me about what this involves and how this framework came about for you.
Well, in the earlier days, as we started to really sort of tackle, when I was at Citi and we started to tackle digital acquisition, quite successfully. One of the most interesting things I had done at the time at Citi is, particularly as I mentioned, they had a really sophisticated data science team that sat offshore and would do a lot of the work that modelled all their marketing. And as I said, they knew how to send a direct mail to a customer, and they knew how to target and get the results that they needed. So at the time, digital was actually not competitive. Right? It wasn't competitive for them. Through leveraging the capability that existed within that team, we were able to start to buy redundant inventory off, we worked at the time with our media placement agency and our internal decision management team, and we were able to build a model that allowed us to, really sort of change the way that media was being bought, at least for us, in how we negotiated buying redundant inventories on cost per acquisition, when at the time everyone was buying, at a CPM level. And that really changed the game for us. That changed the game quite dramatically. So anyway, I was sort of asked at that time to move into some other markets around, particularly Asia Pac, and go in and help scale up, or at least go in for a couple of weeks and help sort of build the capability within other digital teams. And I sort of looked at that and went, well, how do you do that? Right? Because every market's still going to have its nuances and differences. In Australia, Google was, a key, platform. But up in Asia, Yahoo was. What Google was actually at the time not broadly used. So you couldn't just go in and say, do this or do that. What I did, and that also there was some sort of seed funding that existed to explore, how do you become better? How do we become, as an organisation, better at digital? So I used that and the relationships to start to look more broadly than financial services, to look at the capabilities of organisations that were being successful in digital, to map what they were. So when I walked into these other countries, the 2 weeks wasn't just about presenting slide decks and talking about how good we had done it in Australia. It was about mapping their digital capabilities and sort of calling out, if they were going to try and tackle similar things, what were the gaps that were going to lie in their teams, or the capabilities of of the country's teams as well? How would that impact their operating model?
I have so many questions from what you've said already, Michael. Let me go through a couple of them. When you talk about looking at successful organisations, what kind of measures of success are you talking about in that context?
The theme that I sort of picked up, measures of success, we usually anchor on output type measures of success. Now, one of the things I do want to say is I've been looking a lot at organisations where the product is not digital. When we start to compare ourselves, I always found if you compare yourself to more of these, tech type companies, which most like to do, they've got an inherent product that is digital, And if you look at where disruptions always happen, disruptions happen at organisations that are not able to, I suppose, be able to compete in the digital world.
Yep.
So when you look at what success looks like, what I had to do is I had to look at the themes that were emerging. And one of the themes that you pick up quite a lot out of organisations that don't have a digital product. So I'm selling a credit card, I'm servicing that customer digitally, is they look, the success is very feature led. So it's like, how fast have I been able to roll out different features? How fast have I been able to deliver change? And that's one element that I track quite a lot, that I found that most organisations are measuring success aligned to my speed of change, so my momentum. But I measured success not just on speed of change. I found that was probably an inhibitor to trying to deliver value. And looking at the organisations that really started to measure their change on what is the outcomes that they were trying to deliver to, and how are they connecting the outcomes to the digital change or the change that they were making into the organisation. So I started looking quite a lot at a number of different. At a number of different documents that existed within organisations, more broadly than just trying to sort of track, are they a profitable company, right? It was more about how clearly are they measuring their objectives and tracking their digital change to those objectives versus just calling out, I've delivered 50 features or I've delivered this.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where I started to really try and track measure of performance of, what's successful and what's not.
Interesting. Yeah, great. And the next question I had was, when you're looking at the capabilities of these different teams, what types of elements are you looking at specifically?
Yeah, well, one of the things, and this thing's merged over many years, right? So it hasn't just sort of, it's always a work in progress. But where I've anchored on is I anchored on these, what I call three, the performance factors that I always map down to three. And we hear a lot of these words being used more broadly, but and it's around culture, effectiveness, and creativity, right? But when you start talking about those words, obviously there's a lot more detail to each particular one. So I at the very top level look at those three things, and when I start to look at companies, I can start to then track at that broad level. So if I look at, say, financial services as an example, you find that they've got a developing strength in effectiveness, right? Their effectiveness is normally driven by their need to be faster, to be more agile, to be more efficient in their productivity. They actually don't have strong capabilities compared to other markets or other segments around culture, around their creativity. And the culture is more about, well, we understand the teams are very clear on how they are meant to operate. We invest in our people and we manage risk. The risk of us delivering the solutions that are going to actually change the outcome for the organisation, not just risk management at an organisation level. How do the teams manage the risk of what they're doing and making sure that the value is going to emerge from the work that they're doing? So you start to feel those themes. So culture, effectiveness, and creativity. Right? But underneath all that, I've got 9 capabilities that I've really been tracking and mapping, and that rolls up into those 3 performance factors. But under that, at the moment, there's 56 competencies that are key across, that's sort of lined up within that framework. So all of them make a difference. Not everyone's going to be more mature in each one, right? Because that's a very sophisticated organisation. But depending on the organisation's strategies and the objectives that they're trying to achieve, there are key pieces that they need to make sure that they're focusing on. And that can be the dimension between them being successful and not successful, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Can you take us through some more of those specifics, for example, those 9 capabilities, or give us some examples of the other factors you mentioned?
We'll start with a problem or objective. Look, can my business scale this? Can we deliver this transformation that we're going to work on, or are we going to? Where will the gaps lie? Or the problem that they might be thinking about is they might be saying, look, our teams, we always seem to miss our delivery. We've got extended timelines across projects and teams, or we have a massive reductions in return on investments. So it actually always starts with a problem. While I've sort of found in the work that I've been doing here is I can look at a capability profile and I could probably pick the problems that the teams are probably going to have. An organisation, or the ones that I've spoken to, or the where I've sort of been researching or taking this through, most organisations start with a problem, and one of those problems you can then start to look at the different combinations of factors that could be impacting that. I mean, I'll use one as an example. One of the ones that feels really common, where teams talk about their inability to actually deliver return on investment. If you look at all the stats, digital transformation, right? You only have to start looking at the stats. 70% will fail, right? And why they failing? Well, the expectations that have been set, right, haven't really emerged. And remember, in the business cases that would have been developed, would have been if we start to invest in digital, we're going to see this value start to emerge. And so if you're talking to more senior people, they're going to sort of say, I haven't actually seen that value emerge. Or the business cases that were put forward to sort of secure that investment. If people go back, I commonly get, when we go back and review the business case that was put up, it never hit the benefits that was predicted. Right? And you always get people quoting the whole, Bill Gates. I think it was the Bill Gates that said, you overestimate what you're going to achieve in 2 years, but underestimate what you're going to achieve in 10. Now, with that, when you're starting to look at why aren't these investments in digital returning on investment, and you start to then track that through a leadership capability into a competency called value management, and you start to look at all the different dimensions. There are some organisations I've spoken to where everyone in the team understands the economics of the business. Right? How does this business make money? Right? You'd be, without sounding critical, but you'd be surprised in many cases where product teams who are now tasked with delivering the transformational objectives of the organisation, where big business cases are being put forward to deliver on big benefits, and you can't get a clear view on how does the organisation make money, right? Where are the economics of that to me is one example of one competency within a leadership capability that sits within culture, where an organisation thinks that they're not making return on investment because maybe their business case was wrong, or they can look at many different reasons they didn't execute well. That value management one, I found that an organisation where the people in the teams can actually tell me how clear, and very clearly and very consistently where they make money.
Yeah,
it's really important for two reasons. Obviously, when they prioritise work, or every team's got to prioritise,
yep,
and they always have approach to prioritisation. But what's more important, I found, is where are they destroying value, right? There was one example in some work when I was doing at AMP where I was looking at a part of their transformation when I'd just taken over. And they were unable, the team I found at that point in time, when I asked that question, weren't able to answer that very clearly. But when we tracked back some changes they made, they'd actually destroyed value, in one part of the end-to-end experience that was quite critical for one part of their stakeholders. So without having that view and making decisions, right, then when you start tracking things back and say, well, return on investment or delivering outcomes that are going to meet expectations, if you're making decisions that feel that it's the right decision to make, but you can't connect it back to value, you can be destroying value, and that can have a really big impact on your ability to be successful. So that's just one example.
Yeah, great. No, I love it. So what happens then once you've kind of defined the digital capabilities or started mapping them out? What's the process that you go through?
Yeah, so for me, I've always found the place for me is to start there to give me a lens of where to focus, because there's many places you can focus, and why will you focus on where you focus? And that's how I've tried to manage what I do, just in the jobs that I've had across the companies that I've worked for, is when I'm asked to do some work or when I'm looking at how to improve the performance of the teams that are delivering, where am I going to go? Because they themselves are always under pressure, and you want to invest and build their own capabilities, but you want to focus on where's the right place to focus.
Yeah.
So the way that I've always looked at it is by doing an assessment, I can identify the places to start and just get more focused on saying, well, look, if we're trying to solve this problem, or if we're trying to evolve the team to tackle, these objectives into the future, we need to start into these places. And it just gives you a bit more opportunity to focus as opposed to running a whole lot of stuff. Because, look, I've worked in this space for a long time, and, every day, learning more and more and more, and it just gets more complicated every day. And there's so much and so many things that can be done, and so many people trying to sell new and interesting things. I think it's very difficult for anyone in a leadership position to be making good decisions. But at least this gave me a bit of an approach to how do I focus to make better decisions. I'm not saying I was ever perfect with it, but at least it gave me an ability to be able to go to the places and rationalise why I was doing the things that we were doing.
Yeah, definitely. Can you give us another example of how you've worked through this type of process in the past?
When I first joined AMP, for one example, there was no real digital capability. There was a digital team that was there, but obviously now there needed to be a digital capability that needed to be built that was more focused on the enterprise. And then how do you then start to build that forward? So at that point in time, by using this and look, instead of running in and just saying, let's just design an org structure and put people in it, and then, build a roadmap and start to execute on that roadmap. They're all important things to do. But in doing that, I wanted to actually understand some of the other capabilities that I needed to build, competencies I needed to build to emerge, so that when that was starting to happen, that the team themselves was going to be successful. There was a pretty big change agenda that was standing in front of them, and I knew that they had to be able to make good decisions, without being micromanaged. And that was back in 2013, 2014 as an example. And when I got there and started to look at that, it gave me the ability to really focus, identify the things I needed to focus around, two areas: leadership, and people. And I spent probably a good 3 months early just focusing in those areas before we actually really got into the nuts and bolts of tackling the most complicated things that were lying ahead. And that then, by the time we then got to the ability where we now had to tackle some pretty big things, like one of the things that we did at that point in time, or I knew that was standing in front of that team, was the organisation had two different platforms, a wealth platform and a bank platform, that had to be brought together. And it had to be brought together in a short period of time, and I'd seen at the time bigger banks had failed on that, or trying to deliver on that similar sort of complexity, and had spent years and hadn't got to an outcome. So I focused on making sure that team, it wasn't just about the structure and the people, it was making sure that they had the right tools in their tool belt. They had the right alignment on roles and responsibilities. They understood, what they were going to make decisions against. So we spent time looking at the value, how they understood how the business made money, is when I use that example of value management. We looked about, how we were going to performance management. I looked at a lot of those sort of areas, got that into play, and then we started to move forward. And they were really successful. Like, that was a team that tackled, a massive amount of transformation in 2 years. That was the largest, I believe, at that time in Australia, but delivered on our, work, like bringing those two complicated platforms together, within an 8-month period, successfully, right? And it happened because we didn't just run at the project and try and focus on just standard project management functions. We focused on the capabilities of the team and making sure that they were ready to tackle something of that complexity. So that was a good example for me, that if you focus on that and you take that sort of lens, you can set your teams up to be successful. If you don't, you trust that they're just going to run at stuff and make the right decisions. And while they'll do it in best intent and best interest, the point is going to be is, have you set them up for success?
I really like that, because I think it's something that probably doesn't get talked about enough. I mean, we're always talking about the tactics and the strategies and how to do things, but in terms of actually being a leader and managing a team, it's something that so many marketers are having to deal with and do, but there's very little training or advice necessarily handed down on how to do that. So I like what you're saying there about getting your team really working efficiently before you then try and, as you say, run at a project or even expand it as well. And get that culture right, make sure they've got the tools they need and the information they need to do their best work as well.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be the crisis we're in at the moment and what's going to come out of it. Everyone's going to run it digital really hard and fast.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, I think that worries me a little bit because I sit there and I go, when you're running it digital really hard and fast, the question, is that could actually be more detrimental for you because you become these feature factories. Once again, you're running at stuff hoping it's going to get you to the place that you're going to get to. And that's not a guaranteed pathway to success. As a leader, as someone who's held, those leadership positions, I always sort of say you have to be in the detail. I really don't think, my personal view is if you're a person leading digital in an organisation and you're spending more of your time managing executives above than working down into the organisation and the operating model and the capabilities, then that's not a pathway to success. This is complicated. It has to have an in-depth way of understanding your organisation at all the intricacies that sit around it. If you're spending more time telling management of the cool new things that are coming up and how you're going to do that, okay, there's a role for that. But the point being is there's more complexity under the hood that needs focus and attention. And with so much going on, right, unless you're mapping and modelling and understanding that, then you're probably not going to be helping the teams themselves be successful. And unfortunately, that's if you're in a digital role, unfortunately, it's about working down in the engine room more than running up into the more executive type places, right? So I would sort of say you'd have to spend 80% of your time down into that area. If you're spending anything less, then your teams will probably struggle. As I said, they'll get on with it. And they'll make decisions. So I've just found it's just a better way, at least for me personally, the way I was going to always operate.
How did you learn how to manage a team in that way? Was there any skills development that you did, or was it just learning on the job, or did you have an inspiring manager in the past?
People have always said to me, who's your mentor, and I've always had inspiring managers. I think just having managers themselves who give you the ability to, learn and make mistakes is always been important, particularly when, I've been working so long in the internet digital space when there was no ever predefined pathway and there was always lots of expectation. One of the things I always joke about is at one point I used to always map what Qantas was putting on their in-flight entertainment around internet, because you're pretty much sure an executive who was on a Qantas flight from Sydney to Melbourne and saw it would come back wanting something. I remember one where, tablet was starting to be promoted long before tablets became, what they were. We need to be into this and we need to be doing that. So you've always had to be at the forefront of, managing expectations. When expectations get formed from a lot of the hype that gets put out there, and you yourself have to be able to, navigate through that without just running at what anyone ever told you to do, because that was always complexity. So I was always inspired by the managers and the leaders that I always had across, particularly across, Citibank and AMP, because they gave me the opportunity to get on with it and they allowed me to challenge them back without just doing what they said. And they were really great people to work with. So I've always being blessed that, I had some leaders that I've worked with that gave me that opportunity. I don't think I would have learnt what I learnt without that, because I would have just been doing what they were telling me to make them happy. And that was never what I wanted to do. I wanted to do things that were the right things and what I thought was going to be successful.
Yeah.
So I've always been blessed by that in the way that allowed me to learn. I've made lots of mistakes. I always make a joke, watch me and do the opposite, because I'll probably get it wrong. But I spend huge amounts of time reflecting and analysing and seeking feedback. And I do that daily. And I think that's allowed me to sort of, at least personally, find a place where I feel more comfortable that I've got the information to make good decisions.
Yeah, great. For someone who's running at a project right now and maybe hasn't done some of that prep work you were talking about, what would you suggest they do?
Well, I think what you're going to find is a lot of people, particularly in our digital space, being thrown at things that they need to do, right? And a lot of it will be coming from the top. I need to do this now. Things that weren't on a roadmap before, or at least weren't prioritised, are now getting prioritised. So the pressure most people, I think, are going to start to feel, particularly in those roles, is let's do this, let's do it fast. And a majority of them are going to be probably in themselves questioning, even with whether that's the right approach. But they'll get on and they'll do it like everyone will do successfully. But I think there's a bit of a time for reflection. I think there's a bit of a time now to say, well, okay, I get that we've got a short-term objectives, that we need to deliver some initiatives that need to come out now that now are more important, and I get the change that's going on. So first and foremost, we need to do those changes. We need to find a way to at least accommodate those, because if we start pushing back on things right now, right, that's not going to work, because people need to feel that there's momentum happening in relation to that. But now you're going to find that this is also the opportunity to start challenging the conversation, or open the door to a new conversation. Where does this organisation think they need to go digitally, right? Remember, there's a big difference between digitising, which is taking that existing business model and just throwing more digital at it, to being digital. Being digital are those organisations that are going to now make their product a lot more digital, and that's going to mean a business model change. So are we as an organisation going to really focus on optimising our existing business model and digitise more of it? Or are we going to have the expectation that we're going to become more digital based on the fact that this change is going to force us into that position, because we're going to have much more people now, willing to engage digitally and engage in different ways than they may have been a few months ago. So that's your first thing that you want to be able to do, and understand that, because that's your first question you need to ask, because then you're going to need to then look and say, okay, what will that mean for the organisation's ability to be able to come out of this the other end, and not just come out of it with a whole lot of stuff that they've thrown, and become a little bit more thoughtful of how they're going to operate. So look down now and sort of, you'll know the gaps that you have, right? You would have seen them and felt them. But you need to be able to articulate them more in how they're going to impact the ability for the organisation to move forward beyond the crisis. So getting an understanding of what is the expectation of change, I think that would be a question that I would now be asking of many of my senior leaders, to say, what is going to be the role of digital in the future? And please don't give me the answer just to roll out more stuff. Let's start to get to the place where we think a little bit more about that role. So that'll give you the opportunity to then start to change, I suppose, the narrative, and then maybe the function of how you and the team need to think about how they're going to operate moving forward to achieve that.
Yeah, great. Excellent. Some good advice there. I'm busy taking notes here in the background.
Well, as I said, watch me do the opposite. So,
So what are you seeing in terms of key themes within organisations that you're working with at the moment? Are there some kind of common gaps or places to start, or something that no one's really kind of nailing at this point?
Yeah, I still think creativity and culture are the things that are just key gaps that seem to emerge. We've come out of the era of agile and agility, and that word's got many different meanings. We've come out of the era of everyone proclaiming success at digital transformation. I mean, one of the things over the last couple of years I've been surprised about is, particularly last year, how many organisations was proclaiming success at digital transformation.
Yeah.
And, I was sort of thinking, how did we get to that place so quickly? Like, how are we all so successful at digital transformation? Obviously, digital transformation had many different meanings. In majority, it was digitisation. Someone could build an app and that was digital transformation. That's not digital transformation. That's digitising. Building an app, isn't that. But that's how it was all being promoted, and that we've come out of that era of just do more, get more stuff into a digital channel and throw more stuff at it, and and be faster at getting it there. So that agility word also itself, right, had many different meanings. But we've come out of that with a view that we're more, when I use that performance factor I've always focused on is effectiveness. We're good at executing, we're good at maximising productivity of our teams, or at least, the processes that are trying to flow. We're better at marketing, with all the programmatic and all the technology that's sort of come out of the last 5 years. We're good at that. We're good at, using third-party, cookies and data and, targeting harder and faster and being able to validate that we're getting more return, or lower cost per acquisition through our channel. And that's where we are. And most are very good, or you'd sort of say the most predominant theme is we're effective, right? We've used digital effectively. Now, when you start to then go up into your culture or particularly your creativity, is this word where I think, the next decade, that will define the organisations. Just being better at executing and being more efficient, right, isn't going to change the landscape. That creativity, right, and being able to connect an experience with all that intelligence we have and that emerging technology, we're not seeing the change that we proclaim that we're seeing coming out of it. I think if I was giving any organisation some, advice, I'd be thinking, how do you now start to emerge out of being really effective, to having a broader digital culture? We hear and we read a lot about that, but what is that to that organisation? I know where we need to be going. I have the right people and I've developed those people, and I think risk management comes to a real part in that. How do I know that the things I'm going to do are going to work, right? Not only that, how do I know that the stuff I'm doing is going to meet, not just the people that I'm targeting, but have empathy towards those who maybe I'm not. I think one of the most interesting, as an example, I look at financial wellness in the financial services industry, and obviously, it's one I follow quite closely. If I use that as an example, I don't think there's one financial services organisation in the country that hasn't got financial wellness as a goal. So you throw effectiveness at it and they'll roll out a whole lot of solutions that are about, tracking how much you spend and telling you if you built that, you didn't spend money on that coffee this week and you put it into, an investment and a compound interest that could buy you a house in foot. Like that, an example is, where what they're actually doing is starting to exclude a whole different part of the population who don't think of financial wellness in that way. Banks think of financial wellness aligned to most of the people who would probably walk into those places and be quite well remunerated, or at least well remunerated above those people that actually need support. It's funny, I did some research in the last 12 months for a presentation I was doing on financial wellness. And I went out into, the places where you would know people need help financially, right? Now, the first question I asked is, what's financial wellness to you? And you know what I got was, I don't know, it's nothing, right? They didn't even relate to the term financial wellness, right? But there's this raft of digital solutions in the market now proclaimed to solve financial wellness problems. For the person who's waking up every day trying to work out how to feed their kids and buy the things just needing to get to the end of the day, financial wellness has not entered their vocabulary.
No, it's not a term they use.
No.
It's not a term they use.
Can I ask you, if you get more into the detail, they can tell you when to buy their groceries at what hour because, stuff that's about to expire, right, is now marked down and they can save a few dollars. That's financial wellness to them. It's survival. They're not using an app to work out where did they spend their money last week. They're constantly scanning the world they live in to understand how do they get something cheaper because that dollar saved is actually going to make a benefit to them. So why is that an example is because, when we're good at effectiveness, we'll execute a whole lot of solutions that may not make a difference, right? And when we look at our culture, we'll look at the target markets that we're trying to impact, but then we won't think about those more broadly who maybe aren't that valuable to us, but then who do still have a need and a need for some organisations to actually, probably tackle that need. That links down to creativity. how are you solving that problem, right? So being able to step away from effectiveness and be really good at delivering and being really good to optimize, the way you're working in your process, to really tap into creativity. You're going to start to see experiences and solutions in digital start to emerge that are actually, I think, going to change the game for society. So I think this year, particularly, or this next decade, as we think more about sustainability, we think now about the organisations. We hope that will then mean that they're going to be thinking more about the organisation, how can they think more creatively, not just to solve their bottom line problem, but to solve the problem for society. And you only have to study and go into some emerging markets, go up into Philippines, go up to a bank like Union Bank, right? You could see that they have a bigger strength in creativity than they do in effectiveness. Have a look at the solutions that they've rolled out, solutions that are solving the problems for the unbanked or the people that don't need bank accounts but have problems, or the problems that they're trying to solve for are more broadly than just trying to get them into a bank account. I've found that when you start going into emerging markets and you start looking at organisations there, their motivation isn't just bottom line. Their motivation is actually tapping into the real problems that their communities and their countries have. And you see some really, really interesting solutions digitally starting to emerge. And when you come back to Australia, you don't see that same level of creativity emerging. The motivation isn't there to solve problems more broadly that aren't related to the bottom line. But I think that's where I think it's going to get interesting. It needs to get interesting because I think we as consumers are going to value organisations more on how they contribute to the world that we live in versus how they just contribute to the bottom line. And that was emerging anyway before coronavirus, and I think it's going to probably accelerate it a little bit harder. So if organisations don't jump onto creativity as a performance factor that I sort of measure, then I think they're going to probably struggle to deliver to that objective.
Yeah, I like that. I really like that piece, and I think it does highlight how risk adverse we've all become, which I think is due to, the focus on ROI and the trackability of everything and the measurement that we have available. But at the same time, there's a balance there, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a balance. I mean, we all have to deliver a benefit for the organisation at a bottom line benefit. I think, everyone, that's just the basics of any business. But where's the world going to shift from that? Are we now still comfortable that everything is just bottom line deliverable? So can I get away with my digital program just delivering cost out, just digitising parts of it? I can package it up and sell it that I'm delivering innovative outcomes, right? The reality is, am I really delivering innovative outcomes?
Yeah.
And I think we're going to start judging organisations, more on, how they contribute to a better world than just they deliver the better line. Sure, we all want the bottom line there because, we might be shareholders or we might work for those companies. But yeah, it's
more than that.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been great to delve into this topic with you in some more detail. One final question. How do you stay up to date and keep your skills and knowledge fresh in this space?
Yeah, I consume a lot. Everything I do and everything I learn, I bring it back into this, the research that I've done around building this framework. So I've got particular topics that I'm exploring at particular points in time. So I'm not looking always at just general things in whole. I might be saying, well, let's pick up at how value is being managed across many organisations. So I'll pick a topic that I want to really delve into and I'll spend time on that. And that's one part, is there's so much information floating around. How do you sort of digest all of it? And you always get to that point. You go, I read something really interesting, but I can't remember what I read. So I spend time focusing on a particular topic at a particular point in time, and I migrate around that depending on what I feel sort of happening in the market. I read a lot. I actually will be up at 4:00 every morning, and I spend the first 2 hours, and that's just that time between 4 and 6 actually, where I just spend time reading and using that time because there is no distractions.
Yeah.
I do go to bed early. I'm an early starter, so that's the best time for me.
What are you reading? What types of things are you reading?
Yeah, I mean, I do read. Depends, as I said, on the theme. At the moment, I've been reading many different books around. I've been delving into some economic books, particularly around. The one thing that I'm sort of more interested in is some of the positions that were happening on in relation to the gap in wealth and that emerging, because you hear that as a theme that's starting to, a lot of people are really talking about. I'll look for different books around a theme at that particular point in time. I find it hard to get information. I've actually probably stepped away a lot from the mainstream media, only because I sort of find it sort of got too many biases attached to it. So I stick away from those, and I try and get into more academic type approaches, which sound a bit boring, but I sort of found, it has just got more different points of view and points of view that are well researched from both sides. So I do find a lot of those academic, those parts where you can link into academic journals, actually quite valuable. Some of the work might not be relevant and current, but the research that's gone into extrapolating some of that information, right, and getting to that level of detail and being able to present many points of view, I actually find is really, really interesting. So I sort of try and sort of find my way into those sort of places more than just sort of mainstream.
Yeah, excellent. Well, some good tips there. Well, thank you again for being on the show today. I know you've covered a lot of stuff. I've got, as I said, a lot of notes here, which we'll summarise in our show notes for everyone. Thanks again. We appreciate your time, Michael.
No, it was good. Well, thank you for having me, and good luck with everything moving forward, particularly in these moments of big change that we're all going to start to experience.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a time with lots of opportunities, and obviously a lot more going on for some people as well. But I think looking ahead, there's some good stuff happening as well.
Sounds good. Well, it's great to chat.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. If you liked this episode, please make sure you subscribe so you get next week's episode too. My recommended action item from today's show is to make sure you are clear on the role of digital in your company and think about how you can bring more creativity into your marketing approach. Make sure you join the Interactive Minds Facebook group, where hundreds of marketers have discussions, answer questions, and I share the latest news I'm seeing in the industry. You can access today's show notes at interactiveminds.com/podcast. See you next week.